How's it going, everyone? My name is Jeff. I want to thank ATG and Midwest University for asking me to jump on this little presentation here. Midwest University is one of those conferences I never got to go to, mainly because of schedule, location, etc. And so I guess one of the benefits of what's going on in the world right now is that I can present at all these conferences without leaving my spare bedroom / office here. All right. So today we're going to be talking about some fun stuff, but let's just jump right into it. My name is Jeffrey Pinheiro. Some of you may know me better as the Revit Kid. I'll talk a little bit about myself later, but this is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. Anyone who knows me knows that one of my biggest things when it comes to Revit and BIM is not just understanding the power of what BIM offers, but also as an architect myself, I like to make sure things look good. And so, so this session is meant to really walk through sort of a couple key steps that can help you really improve your presentation graphics and just generally the way your models look, and just give some examples and solid sort of steps to take to at least start from a base point or a baseline that is better looking images, renderings, floor plans, elevation sections, whatever, in Revit. So what it is that we're going to talk about today is I'm going to start with just talking about my journey, my Revit journey, and in specifics or specifically presentation graphics for that journey, because I think it's important in any aspect of learning to see that everyone starts in the same spot, in the same place. And so I think it's kind of cool to dig back through my projects over the years and sort of explain how I developed the techniques, the styles, and the tools you're going to see today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about why I think it's important to focus a little bit on presentation quality and high quality graphics within your content and your models and your presentations and you name it, even construction documents. Construction documents can look sexy, just to let you know. Then we're going to talk about a couple steps that you can take right now to improve the way those things look. So first, we're going to talk about adding depth and shading. Second, we're going to talk about using custom materials. Then we're going to talk about real-time rendering and how that can dramatically change your life. I'm going to go through a couple examples there. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about post-processing and really the idea of you should never, ever make a rendering or an image or even a video, to be honest, and then post that thing on a presentation board or on a slide deck. There always should be a little bit of post-processing, even if it's just as minimal as color correction. So I'll talk about that. So let's run through my journey really quickly. For those of you who don't know who I am and my history a little bit, I am a licensed architect. I've began working in the field of architecture when I was 16 years old. I went to a vocational technical school. So I basically jumped right into architecture, engineering, construction industry from the moment I started high school. But I started working professionally when I was 16, and I haven't left it since. Currently, I work for Turner Construction as my full-time job. And that is, I'm the regional VDC manager for New England. And I've been there for 5 years. Before that, I worked at 2 different architectural firms. One was an architecture engineering firm of about 120 people, and the other one was a smaller architecture firm of about 5 people. So I've had a variety of experience on top of the educational experience of going through and getting my master's degree and my license and all that stuff. And so when I set up this presentation, what I thought would be really interesting was to dig back through the archives and sort of look at my development of Revit and presentations and sort of pinpoint some of the moments where I modified or tweaked my approach to these things, and then sort of carried them throughout even today. Some of these techniques and tools that I started 10 years ago, I'm still using today to improve on my presentations. Okay, so here I'm going to show you some presentation boards and projects from the last many years, from 2008 on. And actually, you can see on the left-hand side, 2008 was one of my very first Revit projects. This was a a recycling center for a studio project when I was at Norwalk Community College. And so this was kind of unique because this kind of was the beginning of my Revit journey as well. And the reason why you see 1,000 renderings on here is in 2008, for those of you not aware, is when Revit actually first introduced a rendering engine in the program. So until then, or up until that point, you still had to use something else to render a model. And so for me, sort of dabbling in Revit, but using AutoCAD and other means to do studio work, seeing that Revit, you could actually, render within the same program. You could do your plans, sections, elevations, and renderings. Was awesome. And so I made way too many renderings of the same stuff. I learned a lot on that project, including if you'll notice the funky roof form. I actually didn't know that you could make curtain walls attached to a curved roof and they automatically sketch. And so I actually manually sketched the profile of all of those to adjust to the roof. So you live and learn, right? And then in the middle there, 2009, you could see that's one of my first smaller residential projects that I completely did in Revit. And so what I'm showing there is elevations, floor plans, a couple renderings for the client, and an entire set of construction documents for this house from scratch, designed to construction documents. And you can see the elevations, they work, but they're obviously pretty flat, pretty ugly. The plans are pretty flat, pretty ugly, but they get the job done. And then 2010, you could see I'm starting to dabble in some different things. It's hard to see because it's a little smaller, but the rendering in the middle there is actually an ambient night rendering. And so that was when I discovered that, you can do some cool things if you set the timing to 2 a.m. in Revit, and you could tweak some of the settings, but you also see the floor plans have some shadows in them. And so I'm starting to play with these ideas. Also, obviously playing with the massing tool. This is conceptual massing was introduced. And so the building, of course, naturally ended up going crazy. And now 11, 12, and 13, these are some various projects that were sort of not groundbreaking, but where I was developing some different skills. You could see all the way on the left in 2011, that was a spiritual center I designed, and I started learning Photoshop. And so I was able to Photoshop my Revit rendering into the actual site image. And so, that was one of those big things. But then even the floor plan, you can see there's some coloring going on. So I learned how and started developing, a color scheme for colored floor plans. And then in the middle is a project that the teacher at the time asked us to present it as if it was a magazine layout. And so one of the things that I took from this, other than you could see I was still messing around with Photoshop in the renderings, but if you look at the floor plans are starting to look really neat. The walls are starting to get fully post-shade. I'm putting shading in. I'm using room numbers that are just a number, and then there's a legend. And I like to call these the architectural record floor plans, because really, I'll tell you, at the time, what I was trying to do is basically mimic an architectural record article. And so I spent the time to figure out how can I quickly make Revit floor plans look like these presentation floor plans that I'm seeing in architectural record. In 2013, that's just an example of playing around with a master planning project and how to graphically play with site elements, this lime green versus this dark charcoal existing, etc. And now 14, 15, 16, you could see, the rendering started taking off and looking way, way, way better. So what I did in this time period is I actually took a lot of time. So all these renderings, I shouldn't say all these, the 2014 and 2015 renderings were made natively in Revit. 2016 was made in Lumion. But in 14 and 15, what I did is I took a ton of time to study how the quote unquote greats of architectural visualization were doing it. So what I mean is like going on Ronan Beckerman or whatever the site is, and some of these CG architect sites, and looking at architectural visual artists and figure out what it is that what in their process is making their renderings look so great. And I took those and I applied those to Revit. And so what you're seeing is I was able to take some of those techniques and tweaks and skills that they were showing us, even though they were using 3D Max and V-Ray, and create extremely similar images out of those. Also in the middle, you could see I'm starting to mess with that floor plan style is still coming through, but now exploded axons and graphics and diagrams and all these really cool things. 2016 again, that was Lumion, so now real time rendering is coming into play, and that just opens the doors. So a couple more examples now: 17, 18, and 18. That should have been 19. Just some more examples. As you can see, the quality of the presentations, but also some of the techniques are improving dramatically over this time. So this is meant to not only just sort of show you the uniqueness of how you can present what you're doing, but also just to show you that I also began at point A, like everyone else does, and you can get to a point. You know, here you can see some of these diagrams are really neat. The one on the top in the middle there is for a museum, and using exploded axon with some fun photoshopping techniques. And those are Revit export images. Those aren't. I'm not bringing that into Rhino or any of these or any vector programs or anything like that. I'm just bringing those out of Revit. So you can create some of those things that you see, like the Bjork-Ingels diagrams. You can create those in Revit directly, as long as you sort of understand the process behind how they're doing it and the end goal, and then how you can kind of make Revit do what you want. Just another quick example of, as I mentioned, I work for Turner Construction now, but I did get my license, so I do like to take on some residential work as much as possible. And so this is just an example, and I like this one because this is a real photo of a house that I designed that's actually complete now, but this was under construction. And so I took that photo and using the Revit model, using Lumion, rendering it, photoshopping it together, you know, it becomes you're blurring the lines between reality and fiction. And so I like this example because I think it's a really nice example of how bringing those folders together can be. So let's talk a little bit about why. Why do we want to make things look better? You know, now that I've sort of seen all sides of the industry, including the construction side of the industry. You know, there are some things that come to mind with me, and as an architect producing construction documents for other people to build, when you start looking at it from the builder side of it as well as the architect side of it, you begin to see not just the inefficiencies, but also how much information gets lost in translation. And I always think about an image like this. I mean, I'm sure everyone out there has built an IKEA dresser, drawer, table, something, right? And I think about these images, and there's not even a single piece of text on here. There's no notes, there's no specifications, right? And there's no floor plans, sections, or elevations. And I think about it like, well, if we're creating construction documents and the end goal is as an architect, it's for me, it's making sure that the person swinging the hammer at the end of the day understands my design intent. Then that to me is the most important piece. And so I think about IKEA instructions, and you think about Lego instructions, right? These are made for what, 3-4-year-olds, and there's no notes, there's no specifications, right? It's just three-dimensional images, and it graphically tells you what's happening. Meanwhile, you know, we're handing these over to somebody, as well as these, and expecting them to build the building exactly the way we visioned it without the model, let's say. Okay. So to me, I understand, and we're not going to go down that road of why we create these orthogonal views in the documents the way we do. But what I want you to take away from this is, and why I am so focused on the presentation side of it, not just because I love the way things look when they look good, is also trying to think about your construction documents as not just checking the boxes of what is required. Yeah, you need floor plan, sections, elevations, right? But maybe an axon of your project, you know, of something within the documents will help you explain, right, a constructability issue. It'll help you explain a design intent. So then what if a house was an IKEA project, right? And so I made this image to be a little, you know, facetious, but the reality is, right, you're looking at this, and you can start explaining how a building goes together with specific diagrams. You know, I'm showing walls and structure, et cetera. Of course, I can't forget some of the tools that we need to get it done. But the reality is, you know, when it comes to Revit and BIM and using these to develop two-dimensional documentation, there's no reason why we can't take advantage of the fact that we are building a three-dimensional model and use that for our construction documents. Okay. So beyond presentations and sales and showing owners and flashy stuff, I do think that there's an inherent value to keeping in mind how awesome things look, and how when you make things look better, people tend to understand them better, right? I think that's a general rule of thumb of anything, right? And so I hope that gives you a framework to where my mindset is. And now what I want to do is sort of jump into some of the steps that you can take to do this, to make your stuff look better. So step one is adding depth and shading. Okay. I know, like I said, we have to make floor plan sections, elevations, but there is nothing in the AAA documents or standards that says you cannot add colors, shading, and other things to a floor plan, even if it's meant for construction. Okay. So what I mean by adding depth and shading is, here is your sort of default Revit floor plan, right? If you created a new view, dimensioned it up, this is basically what it would look like. But by adding shading and actually on this one I'm adding poche, you could see how much easier it is to understand. Okay, this still has the exact same amount of information. There is no change in information between A and B there. Okay. Elevations. Well, I'm sure if you guys, I don't know if you're new or experienced in Revit, so I'm gonna go with both ideas. If you're new with Revit, I can almost guarantee you that the first thing you said was, "Oh my God, these elevations look like crap." I get it. Okay. Because by default, this is what they look like. They're flat. You can't tell, what's close, what's far, what's what, maybe the shading helps a little bit. The levels of acrylic, blah, blah, you get it. So then adding depth and shading, as you can see, improves dramatically this view. Yeah, I turned off levels on this one, but just adding depth and shading. And also you notice one thing I did here too, is I made a little slate bluish color for my windows. Who says, I mean, I know depending on how you're printing them, hopefully there's not as much printing going on, but who says that you can't have an elevation, put some notes on this, and this is your construction document elevation? It makes it a lot easier to read when you know that the windows are blue, right? Or post shade of some sort, and not. So just before and afters there. Again, 3D views, same thing. What happens here? Before, this is kind of your default setup. Adding depth and shading, this is what it looks like afterwards. And the whole point here is just to show you how changing a little setting, and I'm going to show you exactly what setting this is. I'm going back and forth just to show you before and afters, how dramatically it can affect those three specific view types. So how do you do that? Well, there's lots of ways, but what I'm going to show you is something I call the 70-50-20 rule. And it's really just a graphic setting in Revit that you can apply to essentially every view you're working on. Okay, so what is a 70-50-20 rule? Here is my Revit 3D view. As you can see, it's got no shading, nothing fancy. So I'm going to go into my graphic display options. I'm going to go down to my lighting and my shadows. First, I'm going to turn on anti-aliasing to make it look smoother. Then I'm going to turn on shadows and ambient shadows. Then I'm going to set the sun, whatever I need. And I'm going to set my sun to 70, my ambient light to 50, and my shadows to 20. That's why I call it the 70-50-20 rule. So all I did was I turned on shadows, turned on ambient shadows, and then set it to 70, 50, and 20 for my settings. And just like that, as you can see, you have a baseline now. And remember, I'm trying to give you a baseline to start here, because I know everyone has stylistic differences, so I'm not forcing anything on you. But as you can see from all these views, just by using those specific settings in your views, you're immediately going to have views that pop up at you way more than they did before. This also applies to diagrams, right? I showed that IKEA diagram and I mentioned Bjork Ingels in the beginning. If you are within the architecture space, you're probably very familiar with Bjork Ingels. And one of the things that him and his group are known for is their diagramming. They do a great job of pretty much every project that they do of breaking them down into these party style diagrams. And so again, me, as you can, I think the theme here, as you can see, I like trying to use Revit to do everything instead of using 17 programs. I wanted to look at, I studied, this is one example, but there's obviously tons of them that Bjork Ingels did. I was just looking at those, and I don't know what they do these in. Maybe they're drawn in Illustrator, maybe they're in Rhino or Grasshopper and exported from there. I actually have no idea how they actually make these, but I thought let's see if I can create these in Revit. And so I created a series of different ones and for different projects, and I'm getting the same look and feel. In fact, I think some cool things that are coming out of it is you could also model arrows and asterisks and all these cool things using this technique. So what you're seeing on the left hand side is an example, and then on the right hand side is another example of sort of a diagram massing sort of study that will you can use for presentations, graphics, etc. And what's really cool about it is it's actually really easy to use. All I'm doing is I'm using the 70-50-20 rule. So what you'll see here is here's the mass. So if I draw up the mass, and I'm just doing this in the massing tools, pretty simple, straightforward. And in Revit, if you create a mass and you join it, it becomes one object, right? And so what that means is you're not going to get individual edges for each object. And then when you do that, what you can do is you can actually change what's it's called silhouette edges, but think of them as outlines in Revit. You can change those to different thicknesses. So by using my 70-50-20 rule, right now I'm just sort of building the mass and showing you how easy it can be to actually build the mass if you wanted to during the design. Let's say this is the design process. And honestly, I've even made these after the fact sometimes if I didn't have the diagram I needed. And you can see you could just sketch arrows. You can make a family that's an arrow and modify it, whatever, assigning some pink to it. And now I think I'm drawing an asterisk there. And so, again, you can make a family out of this. There's no reason to draw this every time. I think this is just proving the point that you can model whatever you want in 3D. But what's really cool is by using the 70-50-20 rule, you're getting that shading, you're getting the ambient look. If you turn on anti-aliasing, it's going to give that smooth vector look that you see in the Bjork-Ingels diagrams. I'm actually using a railing there to make that arrow. If you're interested in this video in slower time, I believe it is on my YouTube channel and on my blog. So just Google that and you'll find it. But what I really want to show you is now, so I'm applying 70-50-20 rule. And then what you can do is you can set silhouette edges, which means the edges around the outside of your object. You can make those line thicknesses bigger. And so if you set the line thicknesses to something larger, and then you set the scale of your view to something nice, what you can do is you can actually, as you can see from this final image, is it makes it have this sort of stroke, this really cool stroke on the outside. So just something really neat as far as diagrams are concerned to show you how to do it. So that was using shading and shadows to help improve your presentation graphics. Custom materials is another one. One of the things that immediately for a while annoyed me with Revit was how many times in the beginning when Revit first grabbed the rendering engine and started using it, every single project that had brick had that really, really, really ugly Revit brick. And anyone who used the program knows what I'm talking about. It's this nasty Revit brick material that exists to this day in the program. It's just not a pretty material. And anyone who has brick would just click brick and call it a day. And so you'd see all these projects that had the same brick, which is kind of annoying. But what I think really, really pulls, really makes a rendering, and honestly, you could do views that have the textures too, is picking and choosing and using custom materials. It makes it look unique. It makes it look more realistic. It also goes along with your design intent. So what does that mean? That means finding textures that work for your project and finding good textures and then applying them, using them within the Revit environment as well as any other rendering program you're using. This is a sort of materials board that I produced for a project out in Colorado. And you can see on the bottom is just pictures of the site, and on the top are a bunch of the materials. Those are the actual textures that I used. And what do those look like when they're rendered? Remember, this is 2014 or 15. This is native Revit renderings. And then they're photoshopped into their site. But as you can see, I mean, look at the stone, look at the wood, the big wood trusses there, or the wood framing, I guess you should say. And then in this view, this whole view right here is nothing but custom materials. And remember, this is native Revit rendering. The floor is a custom wood material. The walls are a custom wall material. The ceiling is a custom material, and so on. And so you could see how you almost, it bends reality, but it also, it gives it such a more freeing feel. If I was to just click the regular Revit wood floor here, it would not look the same, right? But by using a custom material, it goes along with the design, but it also looks better, obviously. Another view of that project on the interior, obviously a whole bunch of materials going on here, but the wood, the wallpaper style thing on the outside, the concrete floors, the wood floors, etc., even the door in the background. And it applies to not just, you know, complicated spaces like that with a lot of materials, even simple things like this, using a custom material on the walls and then a custom concrete for the floors. You know, that makes up this entire image here of this art gallery space, underground art gallery space. Another example of how materials can enhance these two renderings now are zoomed forward a little bit. These are done in Lumion, but you could see the floors, the cabinets, the roof, all of these things add to the sense of realism in the presentation itself. Even zooming forward to some of the stuff that I've done in the last couple of years with Turner is logistics planning and stuff, right? These things, you know, if you look down on the floor of this airport, if that was just a giant gray blob and didn't have striping and concrete and roadways, you know, it would completely change the look and feel of this image as being an airport. Same thing here. You know, the asphalt materials, all those things. Picking custom and good materials is a huge a benefit when you're doing renderings. And so where do you get custom materials from? Well, first one that I always used to use, and I still use today, although I use a few more now, is textures.com. They have a free user account that I think lets you download, I forgot how many a week. If you want to pay, you can get more, but they have a ton of seamless, high quality textures. They show you what they look like. You can download just the text file, just the or the TXT file, the texture file, or you can download ambient occlusion, normals, reflection maps. They have all kinds of different things, which is fantastic. And then second is Google. I get a ton of textures, and over the years I've gotten tons and tons of textures on Google. The key with Google and textures is pretty straightforward. It's asking for what you want, but then saying seamless texture somewhere in the search. Seems straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't even think about this to get texture. So just a couple examples, because I know whenever I'm talking about custom textures, the first thing that people ask me are, well, Jeff, where do you get all your custom textures for these? And you know, it's pretty straightforward. It's usually those two resources. So then how do you make a custom texture for Revit? So the one thing with Revit is if you're doing it inside of Revit, all you would really need is the texture file, and you need a bump map. And so what I'm showing here is how to make a bump map. Photoshop does have a 3D bump map creator where it'll try to automatically do it. The problem is it's kind of designed for other programs, not Revit, and it also does a really crummy job, honestly. So what I do is actually just take the image, save as. You want to black and white the image. For those of you that don't know what a bump map is, it's the black and white version of your texture that shows that adds artificial bump to your image. And what's happening here is the white part of your image is coming forward and the black is going backwards. So what I'm doing here is I just went made it black and white. I'm changing the levels so there's a huge contrast between the grout lines and the stone. And I'm basically making a custom bump map. So that's what you see here now. Now I can take that original texture in this custom bump map, and that's how I created those wood floors and the stone and all of those great images you saw in that yoga room, for example, was just finding the texture. Because remember, those were natively rendered in Revit. Finding the texture, downloading the texture, creating a bump map for that texture, and then applying those materials to my Revit file. Step 3, moving beyond now, and now let's say we're rendering, but not only rendering, because I will show you some examples where this comes into play even as just a tool, a design tool. But you know, one thing that didn't exist really in most of those examples I showed you until the more recent ones, I'd say within the last maybe 4 to 5 years, that is extremely accessible for everyone out there now, is real-time rendering programs for the win, FTW. If you have not heard or seen any of these real-time rendering programs, I'm happy that I'm able to show you to them today. But it's one of those things that is an absolute game changer for producing images, renderings, and presentations of our models. And so I'm going to run through a couple examples of the three, what I consider the three main real-time rendering programs for Revit users, and show some examples and walk through. But the reality is, I have not hit the teapot in Revit, meaning rendered natively in Revit, probably since that house project in 2015, if not earlier. So I have not used the native Revit rendering tool in probably over 5 or 6 years. And that's because these programs are so much more efficient and better set up to handle rendering than Revit natively was, that it just doesn't make any sense to use it. So Enscape is one. So these are a couple images. So this is an image of the Turner office here in Connecticut. Before we put up all of the COVID measures. So you can see there's glass walls. We're showing some signage and stuff like that. But what I wanted to show this one for is not necessarily as the real-time part of it, but just the fact that essentially all I did for these renderings is I set up my scene in Revit, or I set up my model. I just launched Enscape and I pressed render. That's it. I mean, it happened really fast. And obviously you can see it looks pretty good. The one thing Enscape is great at is interiors. So these are default models that are just basically launched, and the lighting and the setup for interiors with using Revit's artificial lights, for some reason Enscape is just phenomenally good at doing that. And so that's what you're seeing here. Here's an example of a hospital room using some of the newer Enscape assets. For those of you that don't know what Enscape is, it is a plugin that sits on top of Revit. So what I'm showing you here is a model. If I click Start in Revit, you'll see Enscape launches, and you're automatically now walking through your model in a real-time rendered environment. Right? So when you think about it, the advantage that Enscape has over the other tools I'm going to show you, in my opinion, is that it also it acts as a design tool. So I have this window open on one monitor, I have Revit open on the other monitor, and I'm just using it as essentially this working 3D perspective view. So phenomenal tool for that, and as you can see, extremely simple to use. The cool thing about Enscape versus Lumion and Twinmotion, which I'm going to show next, is that if you know how to use the native Revit rendering tools, so if you've gone through the process of using the teapot, like I explained, you just do the same thing and it works in Enscape. So I don't even have to teach people who already know how to render in Revit a new program. They're just seeing it in a pretty light. And so what do those things look like? Here's just an example of a hospital floor from a couple of years back of what it looks like to be inside these real-time rendered scenes. So this is just walking through a live Revit model. What we did with these is we got design feedback as well as end user feedback. We modified things like casework and foot walls and head walls, etc. But I just want to show you an example of actually the other piece of this is what I didn't mention here is what you're seeing here is actually the video of a VR walkthrough. So this is what the person sees in the goggles, which is super neat too. And so as far as getting a Revit model into VR goggles like an HTC Vive, Enscape is by far the easiest right now, the least amount of obstacles, and what you see is what you get, and it pops in there. Then comes Lumion. Lumion was really my my biggest jump into the real-time rendering environment, even before Enscape, to be honest. I was sort of given Lumion when I started at Turner because somebody bought it before I was there, and they basically told me, "Hey, we have this program. Do you know how to use it?" This was like 2014 or something, and so I had to learn how to use it. But turns out that it's pretty sweet. And so this is an older project. This is in Lumion 5, I think, which is quite a while ago. But the big thing about these real-time programs when it comes to especially like Lumion and Twinmotion is you have this image here, right? But it's very much like Revit. What you're doing is in Revit, right, is you're building the entire building information model, and then you're taking snapshots of it to produce your documents. Well, in Lumion and Twinmotion, in these real-time rendering engines that sit outside of Revit, what you're doing is you're building your entire world. Your scene becomes your entire world, and then you're taking images or videos of that. So what you see here is a rendering of this law office that I designed. But what the Lumion scene looks like is this, right? So you saw that one image, but it's actually just one image of this world that I created. So anyone who's ever sat there and photoshopped in trees and people and cars into a rendering, you never have to do that again. I have not. I can't remember the last time I photoshopped a tree into a rendering. Probably been 6 or 7 years since that too. And so pretty freaking awesome when you think about it. The power of being able to build your world and then take whatever snapshot you want of it is extremely awesome. It's empowering, right? The downfall is sometimes you make too many images of the same thing, but whatever. So the one thing that I will give you a little bit of a tip on when it comes to Lumion and making things look more realistic and better in Lumion is in Lumion itself. This is a very Lumion specific thing, is using what we call effects. And so Enscape sits on top of Revit, and it renders your program really well in real time. Lumion sits outside of Revit, and you build your world, and then you take pictures and images. The little tweak with Lumion that you should know about is that even though it's called a real-time rendering program, it still does a lot of rendering when you want to export your images and videos. And so in order for that to happen, you apply what they call effects. So you have a build mode, which I showed you when I was spinning around, and then you have a photo and video mode. And so what you see on screen in your real-time world isn't necessarily fully the way it's going to look when it's rendered. And so the biggest thing I can teach you with Lumion to make things look better is using effects. So this is me taking a default screenshot of this project in Lumion before adding any effects. And then this is adding after the effects. This right now, what you're seeing here is actually not Photoshop. This is the exact rendering as it came out of Lumion. So as you can see, it does quite a bit of rendering, which is pretty sweet. But the effects are super key in that. Otherwise, you're going to get some really flat, ugly images out of it. And you're going to say to yourself, why did I even bother going through the hassle? So just to show you what those effects are and sort of how powerful they can be, this is that same scene. Remember, it's a world. Here's the world. And this is the build mode. So this is the mode where, as you can see, it looks a little gamey. It doesn't look that great. But then if I go into the image and I start turning on the effects, here's depth of field, chromatic aberration, shadows, skylight, which does some different rendering, hyperlight, which does kind of like a global illumination thing, turning on higher resolution reflections, color correction, exposure, sharpening, changing the sun, changing the sky, adding 2-point perspective, adding some fog, adding some more clouds, and then adding some lens flare. So as you can see, that was 2 pages of, I don't even know, 15 to 20 effects. But now when I click render, you get the image that you saw before. So Lumion, I would say, looks, especially now with the latest release, the renderings that come out of Lumion look fantastic. They're soft, they're realistic, they're smooth. But you have to remember that, in my opinion, it's not necessarily a real-time rendering program. It is a real-time environment that you end up rendering out of. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful for anyone who's ever tried Lumion and thought, why are these results not coming out the way that I want them to? So those are some Lumion effects for you. That brings me to Twinmotion now. So Enscape, Lumion, and Twinmotion, those to me are the 3 power players in the real-time rendering environment. And the one thing with Twinmotion is it truly is a real-time rendering environment. And what I mean by that is what you see in your view is what pretty much, maybe with small changes, is what you see when you export it. So there really isn't any rendering. It's really just kind of exporting every view, which is super cool. And so here's a rendering from Twinmotion. I did do a little bit of photoshopping on this one just for some stylistic stuff, but here's what that scene looks like. And so you could see, other than some of that stylistic stuff, what you see in this view is essentially what you're seeing when I'm exporting. You can see the fog, the ambient lighting, all of that stuff is built into the scene itself. So to me, this is the closest to a real-time rendering program. This and Enscape are the closest to actual real-time rendering. The Lumion to me is a real-time environment that you have to render out of. So there's just an image of what that looks like in Twinmotion real time, which is pretty sweet. The other really cool benefit of having what you see is what you get in the program is being able to not just produce images and videos anymore, but also presenting live models. And so this is something that we've done quite a bit now at Turner is utilizing Twinmotion to present our logistics as a live model, and also having them on site. So instead of my team taking the time to take snapshots of every phase of the job at a specific view that somebody might want, you can zoom around and look at any part of the project at any moment in time. Because remember, this is real time. So now we're building this scene and we're giving people the ability to look at the model anywhere they want. And so it looks really cool. It looks really nice. Another example of a live model here. This is a hockey rink here in Connecticut. This is in Twinmotion. And so I'm showing right now examples as far as construction logistics. So we can zoom in, flip around, orbit, pan, whatever, and show different stands. So instead of making images, but on the architecture side of things, this could also be the way you present your projects too. No one says, again, that you have to present still images and animated videos that are pre-produced, etc. You can have set up scenes, and you can have, I mean, here's the final product here. You could just have this view open, and whatever the client wants to see, you can zoom into. I know sometimes you may not want the client to see certain parts of it, but but just as an idea of where this is going, where I see this going in a model-based model-based environment that I believe the industry is going, being able to now produce high quality, photorealistic environments that you can essentially orbit and pan around as if you were in Revit, and whether it's Twinmotion or Enscape as your tool to do it, I think is huge. It's dramatic. It's tying all that stuff I said in the beginning together into this new deliverable that is sort of a live model. But if you are doing exports of images or videos for that sake, please promise me that you will never ever produce a rendering and just throw that rendering on a presentation board or in a PowerPoint without doing anything in Photoshop or GIMP if you want to use the open source program. Please, because I can tell you right now, even just exporting a rendering and color correcting. Sorry, it's kind of weird. Zoom pops up with these things and it can be distracting. Color correcting the actual image, it'll make a dramatic difference there. So just to show you sort of before and after what Photoshop can do for you, and post-processing, I should say, can do for you. This is a native Revit rendering. So this is how it looked coming out of Revit. So this is when I rendered it using the Teapot back in 2015, and I exported as a PNG. This is what we saw. Then with a little bit of Photoshopping, because the one thing that you'll see with my technique and everything I do is I try to be as efficient as possible, you can make it look like this. Now, obviously, the background, I'll go before and after again. The background helps, so putting it in a photo helps, but you'll notice the building itself has some pretty nice tweaks to it, right? So that's what post-processing can do for you. So what is my post-processing process? I'm just going to quickly show you what it takes, but the reality is I try and keep it as minimal as possible. And what's even better, or even better now, is with real-time rendering, I don't even need to do the whole put in the background and do this thing. It's just the color correction part of it. It's using these specific tools. So now my photoshopping of renderings, I'd be lucky or I'd be stretching it if I said I spent over 10 minutes on an image photoshopping it, honestly. But there are some cool things that you can do. You can add, you can enhance these shadows. You can add some bloom. This is when I went and I studied the real time not the real time, when I studied the professional rendering folks. I looked at how they were exporting rendered channels. And so what that means is when you're using like a V-Ray, for example, you can make a rendering. You can export the reflections as its own channel. You can export the depth as its own channel. You can export highlights and shadows as their own channels, and then you can overlay those in Photoshop and use them to enhance those things. So if you want to enhance reflections, you already have it there. The problem is with Revit, we never had that ability. You basically just brought out an image. There was no channels. And so what I did was I was able to sort of artificially create them. And so what you're seeing here is I'm going to run through some of the before and afters in the process. And so if I turn off the whole folder, you'll see the difference there. There's the background image. And then if I expand this group and I walk through sort of those steps for you, you could see I have the original image. I'm going to roll backwards. And then if you can read those layers, I don't know if you can, but I'll read them for you. The first one is called highlights. Then there's shadows. then there's fog, then there's fire chimney, and I'm just turning these on and off. So you can see I'm turning on and off highlights. Then I'm turning on and off fog. Then I'm turning on the chimney, and then I'm doing some color correction. And so for that image, all I did was I enhanced the reflection a little bit, enhanced the shadows a little bit, enhanced the highlights a little bit, added some fog for a little bit of a more misty sort of feel to it, and that's basically it. The only other tip I will give you is the Camera Raw filter, which is a tool inside Photoshop. If you have not used it before, look it up. It was created to edit raw photos coming out of HDR or DSLR cameras, but it has this little slider called clarity and texture. The new one has texture. And then it does exposure, contrast, and stuff. So at a minimum, if you're bringing a rendering out of any program, if you run it through Camera Raw filter, and you change some of the things I'm showing here, like exposure, contrast, clarity, you'll see an immediate difference. Just adding clarity and texture using this tool will bump out your actual textures on your model quite a bit. You can see I'm showing some before and after there of what the Camera Raw tool is actually doing, and that's before adding any of the other shadows and highlights and all these good things. And the other thing too in Photoshop, for those of you not familiar with it, that you'll want to sort of teach yourself, is look up how alpha channels work and masks, and how that can work on layers. And so what you see in this view is on the bottom right is like where it says highlights. Let me mark it up. So right here where it says highlights, you'll notice there's this little black box next to my image. And what I'm doing there is I create a channel that shows maybe the highlights are overexposed. And then I can just sit there and I can paint within Photoshop. I can paint and expose only areas that I want these to see. So let's review what we went through today. So first, we talked a little about my journey. Then I explained kind of why. And then what are the steps? The steps are: first, start with your sections, plans, elevations, 3D views, etc. You want to add depth and shading. Start there. The 70-50-20 rule is going to change your life. Then, whether you're using Enscape, Revit, Lumion, Twinmotion, V-Ray, I don't care what you're using to render, always use good and custom materials. Okay. Step 3, look into real-time rendering programs. And honestly, I don't see any reason to render directly from Revit ever again, in my opinion. The cost of some of these programs is not that great, and it's completely worth it to not deal with native Revit rendering and the time it takes to do so. And then last but not least, don't ever produce a rendering and not run it through some sort of post-production again. Well, if you take anything away from that, or from this presentation, I'm hoping that that's what it is. So with that, I want to open the floor to questions. I know we have a couple of questions on there. Before I jump into the questions, you can find me at the Revit Kid on Twitter. I'm pretty available there. Shoot me an email there, or a direct message, or you can obviously find me at therevitkid.com. But also, I wanted to give you a couple resources. So if you go to free.bimafterdark.com, I have a whole series of free ebooks, cheat sheets, and even a mini Twinmotion course. So from Revit to Twinmotion, getting you started in that whole process, you can actually download or sign up for it at that website. So free.bimafterdark.com. If you go to live.bimafterdark.com, that's going to show you all 35 episodes of my live stream, my weekly live stream on YouTube. Where it's myself or a guest talking about all kinds of really cool stuff. And then last but not least, if you go to community.bimafterdark.com, that is a private online community that I've created that has 4 full-length courses. We have office hours and a social media type of environment where you can ask questions and get help. So if you're into that and you really want to take Revit to the next level, or even some things like I have an entire course called BIM Can Be Sexy on expanding on a lot of the things I showed you today. You can take that as being a member. You can join the other 130 members and really find a premium, private, noiseless environment to ask questions and learn Revit. Would you recommend Twinmotion for interiors? That's a great question. Yes and no. So in my humble opinion, the easiest way to get the highest quality interiors is in Enscape, just because the lighting is so great. The problem is, and they're fixing this a little bit with the ability to bring in custom custom objects, you don't have the ability to utilize some of these object libraries from other environments. In the newest release of Enscape 2.9, you actually can bring in your own custom objects, so it's getting there. So depending on what you want to do and what your end goal is, it can be either or. I will tell you that you can get some decent interiors in Twinmotion, but it is a little bit more work. Sometimes you're placing Twinmotion lights instead of using the Revit lights, for example. Some little reflection things and whatnot. So if your goal is to only do only do interiors and to just produce renderings, then I would say Enscape is probably your best bet to start. If you wanted to use live models or also use VR and stuff, you can do, you can balance which one makes sense for you. The answer to that used to be use Twinmotion, because then you can bring in objects from all over the place. Because the thing with interiors is that if you're trying to make a photorealistic image, it has almost less to do about the space and more to do about the random crap in the space. And so you want to be able to fill your space with random crap. And so now you can start doing that in Enscape. So I would say look at those two, but they all can be good at it. It just depends on what your end goal is. Chris is asking, when printing PDFs for construction documents, do you always print in color or do you use grayscale? I always print in color because as you can say, I use color. Even in my personal documents, I actually use a color for dimensions and notes. It's not black. They're actually a like dark magenta-ish color or something like that. And I just prefer the way they look. I will, obviously, if those are being printed in a printer, I like to find out how and why, or how and in what printer and stuff first. For example, if you printed a color set on a black and white DeskJet HP or something like that, it's going to look like garbage. So I try and find that out. If I'm doing it personally, then I like to try and do fully colored sets. And if not, if for some reason you're running into it and people are printing it on black and whites, then you may want to start using the grayscale stuff. But and honestly, printing from the PDF of a color image using the grayscale settings in Revit usually helps a little bit. The biggest issue you're going to run into is like a shaded view. If you have oranges, yellows, grays, whites in like an axon or something, then you might want to flip that to a hidden line view for that specific reason. Question on 3D detailing. Hey Ace, how's it going? Have you witnessed other architects with neither the wisdom or competency to pull this off? Is there a future for this? Yes, man. It's not just me doing it. So I have worked with larger firms and smaller firms who do place axons and section boxed and different things within their construction documents to some extent, right? I mean, depending on the balance between what you model and what you draft is obviously an important thing. So we have to keep that in mind. But 100%, I've seen it happen, and I suggest you do it. There's no reason why, if you had a wall section here, you can't have a 3D version of that there, just to explain in 3D something that makes sense more in 3D. I mean, we all know, we're all working in models. We know how much easier it is to understand design intent that way. Do you have tutorials on post-processing in Photoshop and GIMP on your YouTube channel? Hey, Evan, how's it going? Yes, I don't have anything on GIMP. I know about GIMP. I've always had Photoshop, so I never really learned GIMP. I'm assuming most of the processes can apply, barring specific tools and the names of them. But actually, if you go to live.bimafterdark.com, I don't remember which episode it was, but I did an entire episode where I walked through that exact process I sort of showed you. And then I also have an entire chapter in my full-length courses within the BIM After Dark community about the post-processing process. The 70-50-20 settings, can I give details of those? Certainly. So with the 70-50-20 rule, I wish I had the image just to pop it up. But with the 70-50-20 rule, what you need to do is you want to turn on anti-aliasing. And that's just a preference thing. I think it looks nice with the smoother lines. You want to turn on ambient shadows and shadows. So check those two boxes. Then you go down to your light settings and set your sunlight to whatever you want, so your shadow's the right direction. And then you're going down the line, it's 70-50-20 for your sunlight or ambient shadow lighting. I don't remember which one is first. I'm going from memory. And then the next one, which I think is ambient lighting, and then your shadow lightness, 70-50-20. Azar said, I'm just grateful for your continuous endeavors. Thanks, man. Awesome. Thanks, Azar. Paul, thank you. Any luck using QR codes on your documents versus 3D detailing? Yes and no. We have used it and I've tried them out. The problem I've run into with QR coding is usually people are using phones to register them, and everyone's got different phones and different operating systems and different applications on them. And so we've wherever we've tried to use them, it just depending on who the end user is scanning those codes, you can run into issues like imagine if you're the person going to do it and you don't have, let's say you're using Autodesk, what is it, BIM 360 Docs now or something like that. You don't have it installed on your phone. You don't have an Autodesk account, whatever. You can click it all day long, but maybe you can't see it. Or maybe you have some older phone, or I'm using iOS, he's using Android or Windows. And that to me, that's the biggest issue that we run into with QR codes is if the location the QR code is sending you to is a browser-based location that works on all browsers on all phone and devices, then you're fine. The second it starts using application-specific things, I've seen that run into issues. So we have done it. I don't know if I can say it's extremely successful or not. Whew, that was a lot of questions fast. Cool. Anonymous attendee. What's up, anonymous attendee? Jeff, you're an inspiration. Do you have any tips on dealing with a fear of heights but wanting to build large structures? Oh boy. First, thanks, Anonymous, for the question, and thanks for saying I'm an inspiration. I appreciate it. I'm actually not that great with heights myself. And as far as wanting to build larger structures, I guess depending on what you want to do with those larger structures, I guess you in theory, you can design them and not have to go up them while they're being built, I guess, to some extent. I will tell you, one of the things is kind of random, but off topic is, because I'm also not super huge with heights. I mean, I just painted my house and I was 30 feet up on a ladder and I was a little sketchy there. But I have a drone, and believe it or not, that's been a little helpful. Flying up 200 feet and looking at that screen, even though you're not there, it kind of helps you get over that fear a little bit, which is kind of neat. Or if you really have a fear, it may actually destroy you. So I don't know. Danya, thanks for the links. Awesome. You're very welcome. Can you talk about processing power needed for real-time rendering? Sure. Depending on the program, most of them just in general require just beefier machines. I don't want to say it's only graphics cards, but for the most part, you are relying pretty heavy on graphics card with real-time rendering. So GPU is where a lot of it's happening. So you want to get a gaming graphics card, so a GeForce style graphics card, and you want to get the absolute maximum size and memory that you can afford. But with all that being said, these scenes, the busier they get, there's also other things happening beyond just the graphics. And so, as with anything, the more power and hardware you can have, the better. Like for example, Twinmotion, one of the things I noticed is that it does chew up a lot of RAM, whereas Enscape and Lumion are not. But meanwhile, Lumion may be chewing up a lot of processing power or graphics processing. So I would say you want to stick with a gaming graphics card, not a Quadro. You want like a GeForce, and not a Fire GL or OpenGL. You want a GeForce card, or similar type of card, Radeon, whatever the heck it is called now. And you want as much video memory as you can possibly afford for these things, because that's what it's going to be. But as with anything with computers, and I'm not going to go totally down the hardware thing, is if you're going to be beefing up a GPU, for example, the reality is you're probably going to be beefing up your RAM and your CPU as well. You don't want to put a 12-cylinder, a V12 in a Toyota, a little teeny Toyota or something like that. I just want to make sense. So kind of keep that in mind. They all work together. K-Chair, no problem. And I'm sure ATG would answer that question for you guys too, as far as hardware is concerned. All right, so we hit 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock, wherever you are. I'll take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Does the graphics card still matter if Revit is on the cloud for you? Yeah, it depends on what you mean by Revit on the cloud. If you are running collaboration for Revit, then your Revit is still running locally. and the file is on the cloud. If you're running through a virtual machine, then no, technically your graphics card doesn't really make a difference locally. And as far as Enscape and those other programs are concerned, then a virtual machine, well then yeah. So then you're reliant on the virtual machine and what that has, and that includes and that also includes Enscape, Twinmotion, and Lumion, because those are actually, I shouldn't say that. In order to run a live link like Enscape, you would need to be on the virtual machine. Twinmotion and Lumion, in theory, you could export the file, bring it down to a local machine, and then use them there if you wanted to. But I do know, and I'm not going to pretend like I know all about the details of that, but I do know that you have to look at the requirements for Lumion or Twinmotion and even Enscape as far as how they accept virtual machine graphics cards, virtual graphics cards emulated, depending on how it's set up. So, check with your IT or whoever set it up and figure out what it is. If it's just a box, an actual machine sitting somewhere and you're logging into it, then it probably has typical desktop setup. But if it's a virtual server style machine with shared resources and stuff, then you may want to just ask the questions there. Thank you guys so much for joining. This was fun. This was different. I hope you got a lot out of it. Feel free to reach out to me, and have a wonderful day.